gonna get punched this time.
Why would you say that? Ironically, I know we made the punching joke, which I don't know if, whatever, statute of limitations. Eddin will be here too, so who the knows what's gonna happen.
Yes, Eddin is back. Can't wait. I'm so excited to see my guy Ed.
In a recent episode, Rory and Mal DISS continued to make fun of Julian. In case you were unaware, Julian used to co-host the Rory and Mal DISS podcast with Wayward. He would be removed from the show around the end of 2024 for a number of reasons, including compensation, appreciation, and so on. We are seated in front of the cameras. You're making fun of me directly, which is okay. Everything is okay. Love, war, etc. But if you truly respect me as a human being, I can put up with you calling me derogatory names repeatedly. Since Julian, Rory, and Mal DISS would be disparaging one another on their various platforms, the split would be worse than we had expected.
Ags about shit they supposed to do. Like, nah, no. You don't get like credit for doing what you was hired for. This is what you get paid for to do this. Why are you throwing this in my face like you did something that you weren't asked to do? Just sit there and go, I did this, and it's like, nah, no, that was the agreement. Should I like give you a big hug because you did what you were supposed to do?
Now you gotta put their name like in lights, and like every day they walk and have balloons for them.
Rory, like you're fumbling through a BetterHelp script when it's clear your therapy is just about as effective as Mal's diet.
That fatal night when Eddin, their former producer or sound man, would beat the brakes off Julian during Rory and Mal's DISS holiday party was the beginning of everything that went wrong, and this occurred during what seemed to be an intoxicated outburst. However, as events began to take shape, it seemed as though the show wanted to ignore it. They nearly did, too. That is until Julian and Eddin discussed the matter on a podcast, including Rory and Mal DISS. Eddin didn't appear to care or want to apologize, and he seemed really indifferent. That caused Julian to become somewhat agitated, which sparked the entire process where Julian would complain of headaches, forcing Rory and Mal to bring in a human resources specialist, and ultimately leading to Eddin's termination from the program. However, a number of theories would be developed on Twitter communities and Reddit message boards, with many people expressing their belief that Julian was acting somewhat punk by exaggerating the situation and that Rory Mo never intended to fire Eddin. In any case, a few years later, Eddin was a fantastic DJ at their holiday celebration. Although I was somewhat taken aback, I found it startling because it practically validated every theory that was being put forth at the time. I mean, seeing Eddin made Mal DISS very pleased. Mal DISS and Eddin were joined at the hips. They obviously wanted to keep Eddin, but they were unable to do so after he hit Julian. In the episode, Rory and Mal DISS, more especially Mal DISS, would argue over who would get pummeled this year. Making light of that circumstance struck me as being really crazy. However, I must admit that Julian is kind of turned into a laughingstock in this group, just like the majority of co-hosts do when they leave a show. Overall, though, we'll have to wait and see whether Julian decides to reply, because his last response was hilarious and full of insane shots. Thus, we now reach the point where each of their platforms, since I believe Rory and Mal DISS did win in some ways, I'm not sure where to put it. They're loud, but occasionally I glance at their numbers and think, maybe the YouTube numbers aren't what they are because it's so difficult to get attention these days. When Rory and Mal DISS first started some years ago, they were receiving hundreds of thousands of views each time they posted because they were essentially using the split as motivation. However, there are a ton of podcasts available right now. There are thousands and thousands of podcasts being started even from a few years ago. Now there are many live streamers. Additionally, I believe that Rory and Mal DISS occasionally lose the battle for attention since they are unwilling to discuss the ugly drama or the messy things. And because of that, their supporters adore them. However, I do believe that this frequently results in a loss of attention. And we'll see what kind of deal they land next. I sometimes wonder if Rory and Mal DISS will quit due to the volume, and a lot of people have mentioned how they switch between networks, basically implying that they never seem to stay put because the numbers might not be what people are looking for. Nevertheless, their devoted fan group, no matter how tiny, rides or dies for them, and they frequently go on tour and purchase merchandise. Julian, on the other hand, appears to have decided to walk away from creating content in which someone leaves a show and constantly discusses the show they were on before the split. When he would do that, it did get him a few views, but these days he talks about topics that seem close to his heart, like politics, movies, and a lot of other things like that. However, his channel doesn't have many views, and I'm assuming that the audio numbers aren't either. Additionally, he probably changed to a regular person with a regular job. But I also wonder if Julian thinks back on his previous interactions with his former coworkers, because I know that he stated something like, "Yo, I'm cool with Damaris. There are certain people there that I get along with." And I wonder if you actually think that, man. I believe Damaris was lying the entire time. She was never cool with Julian, in my opinion. She basically appeared to be cool with Julian, who was her supervisor, because he was the producer who was brought in above her, in my opinion. Do you recall when they were hired? They didn't even tell him that he had taken her position because, well, they didn't follow the correct procedures for hiring a new employee.
At that time because yeah, I mean, to be frank, the transition, it wasn't handled. It was mismanaged entirely. There was no conversation between Damaris and I. There was no, sit down or like change of power or like, here's the new structure, here how it's gonna. It was just like, here's Julian, he's in your chair now. So that's
a
it.
change of something?
Well, like they said it to themselves, but there was never, if someone's joining a company, you should properly introduce them and explain to everyone what their role is. And even more so, if someone's retroactively taking someone else's spot, you should probably communicate to the person who is, not losing their job, but, their job's being altered.
Thus, there was a lot of startup culture. However, since there is probably nothing more to be said about Julian, Rory, and Mal DISS, I genuinely believe that this is the last film that will ever need to be produced. Let's see where this leads. This bone has no more meat on it. Danny, why'd you do this is what I'm sure many people will ask. However, it seems to me like Mal DISS is asking who's going to get punched this year. The fact that Rory and Mal DISS brought Eddin back for the DJ party and appeared so delighted to have him there confirmed every theory that was being floated at the time. According to the hypotheses, they never intended to fire Eddin because, as I mentioned before, they believe Julian snuck up and made things worse than they needed to be. Okay everyone, please share your thoughts in the comments section. Did you watch the holiday party? It was quite good in my opinion. The quality was flawless. They were doing transitions in a really intriguing way. Additionally, Rory made a small jab at the Joe Burton podcast while I was watching. Since I wasn't recording the stream, I couldn't record it, but he said something like Ian Schwartzman could never, and then he called out Melissa Ford. I'm looking for the video. The game is the game, but I doubt I'll find it.